All right, so are we recording? We're happy, we're ready to go. It looks like I have
You only
a
got the last 10 minutes of tech issues on
bar across
recording.
the top of mine, so you can't see the title. But anyway, I'm going to do something a little different this year from a traditional mineral talk and talk about something that really nobody wants to talk about, and that's COVID. But I wanted to do this more as a shout out to the mineral collecting community, which I mostly met through Rochester, who helped me turn what was going to be a dystopian, miserable semester in teaching mineralogy to something that actually worked quite well. So we all know in 2020 the world came to a screeching halt, and we all stopped going to work and stopped going to the grocery store and started washing our groceries, and schools closed, and we pivoted, I hate that word now, online. And it became pretty clear pretty early on that starting in the fall semester, when we all went back to school in the fall, that things were not going to be any better. And so everyone just kind of sat on pins and needles waiting to find out what their school was going to do before they could figure out how they were going to teach. And so my biggest concern was what I was going to do with mineralogy. And so here are the rules of the game. This is how kind of life went at Adrian College during COVID. One is we were open, fully in person, but we had COVID restrictions. So all the students came back. All the students were required to wear masks at all times. We were required to wear masks at all times, except when we were in our offices. The students obeyed that when they were around people who could get them in trouble for that, and not so much when they were on their own. We put them in the classrooms. There's a picture of the classroom over here. They all had to be sitting 6 feet apart. So we had to slide all the furniture apart and make sure they weren't anywhere near each other. They were going to be 6 feet from the faculty members. They weren't allowed to touch the same things. That was another big problem because we didn't really know how COVID was transmitted. At least early on, there was concern that, that's why we were all washing our groceries and such. We didn't really know how it was transmitted, so we couldn't touch the same thing. So they couldn't touch the same minerals to learn the minerals. They couldn't touch the same wooden blocks to learn crystallography. And then, of course, we had to keep our classrooms really, really clean. So I attended a couple of online forums for people who were trying to muddle through how they were going to teach mineralogy. And unfortunately, the forums were full of people who were desperately trying to figure out how they were going to teach mineralogy, and severely lacking in people who were going to help us teach mineralogy, because none of us really knew what to do. So off we went. There were more rules, more bothersome rules. This one here, all classes and laboratory sessions must be in person. We were not allowed to teach online at all. We had to be in person. That was a requirement from the college. But we had to accommodate students who were quarantined for 2 weeks if they had COVID or if they had been exposed to COVID. So we had to have online options. So suddenly your class became both in person and online. You had to have a way to teach in both modalities at all times. And sort of on top of that, and probably the worst rule, is that the rules can change. And they did. So if COVID spread was extremely high and they never really told us what that was going to be, we would pivot to online instruction. So 2 weeks in, as I said, the students were wearing masks around us and in the classrooms. That wasn't a problem, but I think you can imagine that there were no fewer parties. There weren't parties on campus because those weren't allowed, but there were these giant super spreader events in all the houses surrounding campus. So 2 weeks in, we went fully online. The state actually shut us down, and we were online for 2 weeks before we came back. So we pivoted online, and then we pivoted offline. And then, just as a preview to the end, I did not get COVID that semester, but I got quarantined. So I had to pivot again in the middle of the semester to back to online and then back to in person. So it was interesting times to try to navigate how we were going to do this. And so the other part, so I guess sort of the goals were, what am I going to teach in mineralogy? And I wanted to do most of the basic things that we usually do. So I wanted to do the crystallography and the wooden blocks somehow. Mineral chemistry was pretty straightforward because that's mostly Excel spreadsheets and things like that. And then, of course, learning the minerals. There's no substitute for learning the minerals while you're actually holding minerals in your hand. A lot of the online participants were sharing resources to either share pictures of minerals or little mini videos of minerals as you turn them around. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted the kids to actually have minerals to hold. We met inside when we had to, and we met outside when we could. The college did put picnic tables outside, so we had a lot of nice fall mineralogy days outside, actually. So what do we do? This is how I accomplished crystallography. I think Al Fauster may recognize these. I think maybe, 20 years ago or more, he gave me these as a paper copy. There's, I don't know, maybe 20 of them. Assemble your own little wooden blocks. So I printed these on cardstock and issued them to the students with a box to hold them in and a thing of glue stick, and said, okay, lab one is you're going to put your wooden blocks together. And these are mine. These look pretty decent and sort of maybe kind of true to the morphology and the symmetry. You can see a couple of them are coming unglued. So if you fast forward and mentally to what you think the student ones look like, where they put them together in a hurry, they were probably good enough to actually name the crystal system in the block, but boy, the symmetry on some of these was pretty bad. They were all distorted and warped and pretty entertaining looking. But because we shut down after the first 2 weeks, they took these home and we spent some time working with their cardboard wooden blocks, learning symmetry and crystal morphology. Somehow it worked. And then there was the mineral part. I wanted to put minerals in their hands. I only had 6 students, so it wasn't like I was trying to put minerals in the hand of a giant class. So I started rooting around my collection, and I started rooting around the college's collection, looking for either things that we had 6 of or things that were big that I could make smaller, which is why the mini sledge and the 10-pound sledge is in this picture. I spent a fair amount of time destroying the sidewalk outside, making big rocks smaller. And I was able to put together a fair number of specimens, but it wasn't enough. And there were some major families of minerals that were really just absent. And so I put a plea out to social media and asked for, of course, not their best samples. I didn't have any money. I couldn't buy them. This was funded entirely by me. So I requested, and this is a quote I pulled from my Facebook page, not so great unsellable samples, 6 each, with the caveat that this project was solely funded by me, so I could pay for shipping, and that was about all I could do. It was a long shot. I was hoping for the best. I didn't really expect great things to come out of this, but I figured if I get a handful of specimens, it's better. And so I was not prepared for what actually happened. It went sort of viral on social media. Even people who didn't donate samples were sharing it. Every day, minerals were coming in my mailbox. I'm sure the only person really unhappy about this was my mailman, who was periodically delivering boxes and boxes of rocks and minerals to my house. The outpouring of support was just phenomenal. I got minerals from people I knew, minerals from people I didn't know who didn't want to, just wanted to support the cause. Nobody asked for money for shipping. It was just a super experience. So I took all of the ones that I made smaller and all the ones that people sent me, and I spent a lot of afternoons on the patio at my house with my faithful travel assistant, Rudy, here, who couldn't travel anywhere either because we were all stuck at home. So he didn't go to the pegmatite symposium or go visit his friend, Professor Rabbit and Skip Simmons and Karen Weber. So we just kind of hung out on the porch, had a few beers, and made mineral kits. We put a whole lot of minerals in a whole lot of baggies, and I put a whole lot of stickers on the baggies, trying to give them sample numbers so the students could work through them and identify them. Turns out that didn't work so well. They started popping off randomly, but you live and learn. So I did that and ended up with 6 kits that look sort of like this over here. We used a lot of Ziploc bags. So I had 5 groups of minerals, and each lab section had a series of minerals in it. So you can see the little tiny bags, each had a mineral in it with a sample number. And each kit came with a little bottle of acid, a streak plate, a glass plate, magnet, all of those things that they needed. And each kit was divided up into 5 different labs. So the first lab was native elements, sulfides, oxides, and hydroxides. Then we went with the second one into halides, carbonates, sulfates, and phosphates, and then started for the last 3 labs on the silicates. So the first one of those was nesosilicates, sorosilicates, and cyclosilicates, and then inosilicates and phyllosilicates, and finally tectosilicates. So each week they worked through one of those boxes. And so let me back up. I should say that, well, no, I'm not. I'll come back to that. So in addition to having a portable kit, which they could take back to their dorm room if they were quarantined, or take home with them if the college actually closed and we all had to go back to 100% online. So they all had self-addressed mailing envelopes on them, and a promise that I would pay them back if they had to mail them back to the college, because I didn't really want to lose them. They're really nice kits. So off we went. The semester started. We made it in person 2 weeks. So the kids got their crystal models glued together, and we started talking about them before they had to take them back to the dorm room and work on them on their own. We worked outside when we could, and even though we were online for those 2 weeks, I agreed to meet with them outside if they wanted to meet outside. So we did that on these nice big picnic tables, so they were able to come out and either work on their minerals or work on their blocks. So once they got to the minerals, they were tasked with identifying the minerals. So I didn't tell them what they were, but I gave them a whole lot of hints. They had a mineral book that they purchased. They had their mineralogy textbook. They could use MinDat. They had handouts from me that were helpful, that sort of guided them along the way to the identification. And then once they figured out what they were, they had to look up the chemical formula. And because there was no rock exam, no mineral test, I couldn't let them all touch the same minerals. I instead opted for something a little bit different and let them look up all of the uses for each mineral. So they figured out what all the industrial uses for. And so that was kind of fun. And so in the end, student feedback was surprisingly positive. I heard things like all of them were very, very grateful that they actually had minerals to look at. And I didn't subject them to trying to take mineralogy via a screen. Some of them noted that identifying each group was like a puzzle, and at least 2 of them, maybe 3, I think it was 3, actually said they really enjoyed that. Several described it as fun, which really surprised me. And because of that positive feedback, now the mineral kits are a permanent fixture in the mineralogy class. And I used them again this semester in conjunction with the samples from the lab. And of course, the mineral test came back. So we are going to continue into, as long as I'm teaching mineralogy, use these kits. And I also still have that chair. That was my office chair. That's where I taught classes when I was outside. That the cooler that's supposed to have beer actually had pencils and various teaching implements in there, but it worked. So as I said in the beginning, the whole point to this was to give a big hearty thank you to all of those people that made it possible. And there's Rudy posing on the porch with Will work for beer because he's a geologist. And so the people that sent minerals or passed the word along that I can remember were Dave Bunk, Al Fauster, of course, myself. A lot of them were from me. Some Adrian College folks, Jim Leslie and Deborah Hoffmaster, and Keith McCleary. Also, Jim Means sent some California molybdenites. Ray McDougall sent me some great apatites and titanites. Thanks, Ray. Doug Rambo, Carol and Reynard, who has been involved in RMS for quite some time, and Mona Lisa Serbescu, another pegmatite researcher, and of course Gloria Stabler was really big into sharing social media for me. She really got this thing going along. And Pat Tucci, who I don't know, and Gary Zito from Colorado sent me some nice ilmenites and things. So, we managed to get through a very dystopian semester and teach mineralogy and put minerals in these kids' hands. So it worked out. And so thank you to all of you who contributed. And that is all I have. So unless anybody has questions.